Hello and welcome. What we're going to be looking at today is we're going to be looking at the structure of interviews. Now, what we're going to be looking at in terms of interviews is basically the way that they're going to be set out, and the way that not only will the ones that you read and respond to be set out, but also the ones that you may eventually have to write as well. Now, the thing about that is that they're quite often used as an alternative text, and also they're quite often used as an unseen text. You may not study them very often, and you will certainly not have them as a major text. However, what they will serve as is a sort of a medium to have a whole heap of ideas and I guess issues being raised, and will do so in such a way that basically what gets presented is a range of questions that you can answer, or a range of ideas you can talk about in the case you were writing one yourself. So let's just have a general look at what you'd be doing. First of all, it's going to be just lives of dialogue, and there's no escaping what an interview is. It's people talking to each other. So the main thing you'll be focusing on is what is said by the individual people. There is also a basic structure to this as well. So there is a way that it is set out, which is somewhat formal. It isn't a massive consideration, but it is something that you want to keep it fairly consistent anyway. So making sure that what you're presenting when you read the interview and what is being told is clear. So making sure that every little bit of the interview does come across quite well. And when you read, and quite often what you'll be given is the written version, and this is called your transcript. Now what your transcript is basically a written documentation of either a video interview or an audio interview. So depending on where it was conducted and where it was held, you'll often be looking at a transcript, so the actual written words of what was said. And that will just be whoever's speaking, what they say, and so on. So let's have a look at the structure. And this is basically what you'll be looking at. Is you'll have your names going to the left, sort of like when you're looking at plays. It's pretty much the exact same structure as a play. There are a couple of little differences. So to start off with, your name of your speaker goes to the left, and then the line of speech comes after that. And it's usually quite basic as well. An opening blurb will come from the interviewer generally, and what that does is basically will be just something that introduces the guest that comes on. So today we'll be speaking to so-and-so. They are this person who has done this and all the rest. And you also have basically non-verbals in there as well. So for instance, when the person laughs, you've got that non-verbal thing there in brackets saying that she is laughing, rather than having to say she laughs after this. And that's basically just in case of something along the lines of either shakes head, for instance, in brackets. So if they don't give a verbal response, then you can document what they actually say without having to write it down later. Okay, so techniques. What sort of techniques will you be looking at? Well, you won't be looking at literary techniques as such. So you won't be looking at various structural techniques or even significant deep points in language. You won't. That's not the point of an interview. The point of an interview is just to communicate some ideas and issues. So particularly the dialogue and the manner of speaking. So like when you're looking at a play and the way that someone speaks, while it won't be symbolic, what you will be looking at is the sorts of ideas and sort of things that they generally talk about. And to basically, when you're looking at it, is you're working out what they're actually saying and what sort of idea they're trying to get across. Because even though generally interviewing is a process of learning about the person at the other end, the subject of the interview, the interviewee, what often happens is that, particularly during a very highly charged political interview or something along those lines, what an interviewer will try and do is they'll try and push for certain kinds of responses out of their guest to try and get them to say something outlandish, which will get the interview publicity. So even a very basic interview may have an agenda from particularly the interviewer, who is trying to get their particular idea across and maybe trying to represent that person who they're speaking to in a particular light. And the other thing is you look at either the point of view, as I said, of the interviewer, but also the vernacular of those involved. So basically, vernacular means the way of speaking, how they speak to each other. Do they speak to each other politely and formally? Do they speak to each other very casually, like they're just having a conversation? What about the conversation, or what about the interview, should I say, is significant in the way that they're basically talking to each other? That's what you'd be looking at. Now, how do you look for meaning? So that's one of the questions, and it's usually something that comes up because you're so used to looking for deeper meaning in things, and you're so used to being pressed for deeper meaning. How do you find it in an interview where it doesn't really have a lot of techniques which actually focus on deeper meaning? As I said, they are straightforward sorts of communication methods. They are essentially two people talking to each other, and they won't be trying to talk to each other in such a way where they're raising a particular symbolic point or discussing something that's poetic. They will be talking to each other just like you would talk to your friends, or someone would talk to anyone about an issue that they believe in. So what you'll be mainly looking at is not only the interview as a whole, so the entire thing basically wrapped up together, but also the quotes which will support that particular idea or agenda of the interview. So if you've got something that the interviewer says which appears to be pressing them to say something and a particular kind of response, then you would quote what those things that the interviewer said was. So if they ask a more threatening sort of question, or if they cut them off mid-sentence, what's that doing? And you often find that's where your meaning will come in. So particularly when it's not always straightforward what an interviewer is trying to get out of their guest, it does vary. So to have that as your evidence means that you can start to form a discussion around it. And finally, having a look at the context of interviews. Now, context is an important thing as well, because interviews aren't the same. And you'll often notice that when you watch different interview type shows, that the style of an interview, or particularly the manner in which it's conducted, is quite different. So particularly when you're looking at television, radio, and magazine interviews, or if you see one in a news section in the newspaper, so an agenda section, they are quite different in the way that they are set out. So for instance, particularly magazine interviews are generally quite informal. Radio are almost especially informal, particularly when you've got a talk-back radio host or something along the lines, where they'll be trying to mainly push their own agenda. And television interviews, again, depends on the kinds of show. If it's for just a news panel show, then it may be more straightforward and serious. If it's more for a entertainment like variety show, then the interviews won't be quite as in-depth. Think about whether it is serious or lighthearted. That has an ultimate effect on the meaning. And whether or not the target audience for the interview, so the kinds of people who would be interested in it, are young or old. What difference does that make to the things that are being said, to the kinds of things that they are talking about? So if you're looking at it for an example, if a politician goes on a show which is mainly watched by younger viewers, how is that different from the things that they would say if they're speaking to an older audience or a different kind of audience? That does come into it, because the questions that they'll be asked, and often they'll be more, I wouldn't say silly questions, but they'll be less serious sorts of questions. What happens is that they'll answer in a particular way, and they'll try and appear charismatic as opposed to serious, which is what they would be doing if they were speaking about to a serious audience, or people who actually know them, what it is they're talking about and what it is they're doing. And that's basically it for a structure interview. They are relatively straightforward, and they are relatively easy to follow. You won't find a lot of very deep techniques in them, but what you will find that you have to do is you have to look very, very closely at the sorts of conflicts that are going on between the interviewer and the subject of the interview. Now, conflict doesn't necessarily mean that they are having an argument. What it means is there a different point of view involved? Is there something which may come up when the two are talking to each other, even if it's just a simple misunderstanding? How does that play a part in the way that the interview is told? So that's basically it. When you're looking at interviews, it's really just follow the basics and you'll be fine. So I'll see you later next time.